we have to be very, very careful about the suspect, the defendant, who has been charged now with the murders of 3 kids and attacking kids. The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, and indeed the police knew that there was a terror-related aspect to Axel Rudak Kuban.
Well, I think the timing was very carefully engineered. I think my own sense is that Keir Starmer and the Home Secretary knew perfectly well about these extra details.
The government wants us to believe Axel Rudak Kuban wasn't a terrorist. Yet this same killer meticulously planned his attack while obsessing over historical atrocities and extremist figures. Why the double standard? Jonathan Hall KC, the UK's independent terrorism reviewer, found clear evidence of planning and extremist materials, but somehow the Home Office claims there was no clear ideological motivation. When it suits the political narrative, similar evidence has been more than enough to apply terrorism charges in other cases. What aren't they telling us? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. What if I told you the government is creating an entirely new legal category just to avoid calling the Southport killer a terrorist? It sounds absurd, doesn't it?
Axel Rudak Kuban, who is 18, pleaded guilty at Liverpool Crown Court to murdering 3 young girls. The British man accused of the Southport attack, in which 3 young girls were stabbed to death, has changed his plea on the first day of his trial, pleading guilty to all charges. He also pleaded guilty to the attempted murder of 8 other children and to the attempted murder of Leanne Lucas and Jonathan Hayes.
Yet that's exactly what's happening behind closed doors, as officials scramble to redefine what constitutes terrorism when it doesn't fit their preferred narrative. Jonathan Hall KC, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, has released findings that should shock anyone paying attention. His review discovered that Axel Rudak Kuban meticulously planned his attack with what he called chilling precision. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was calculated, methodical, and horrifyingly deliberate. Among Rudak Kuban's possessions were extremist materials, including an Al-Qaeda manual. Yes, you heard that correctly. Actual terrorist literature that outlined methods of attacking innocents. Yet despite this mountain of evidence, the government maintains he lacked clear ideological motivation, a standard they rarely apply to other cases. When was the last time you heard officials hesitate to use the T word?
Inside number 10 set out precisely why, in his experience, Sir Keir Starmer would have known about this perhaps within hours.
You know, in the House of Commons, you have legal privilege. Why did the Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, Labour, why did he tell MPs that they mustn't discuss this?
And I took that to be very, very credible information. And it was extraordinary at Prime Minister's questions today to see the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, effectively shutting MPs down.
When someone with extremist materials commits an atrocity, the double standard is glaring. The most revealing aspect of this whole debacle is the government's proposed solution, creating an entirely new offence called non-terrorist mass casualty attack planning. Let that sink in for a moment. They're essentially admitting these acts have all the hallmarks of terrorism, but are desperately trying to avoid using the word itself. It's terrorism without calling it terrorism, a semantic game with deadly serious implications. This convenient redefinition serves clear political interests. By avoiding the terrorism classification, officials dodge acknowledgement of systemic failures that might have prevented this tragedy. It's much easier to create a new category than admit your counter-terrorism apparatus missed glaring warning signs. We've seen this movie before, just with different actors. When certain individuals with similar evidence, extremist materials, meticulous planning, targeting of innocent civilians, commit attacks that align with politically useful narratives, the terrorism label appears before the dust has settled.
The government's own independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, Jonathan Hall KC, has said repeatedly recently that it is important in incidents of terrorism that the authorities put out more information sooner.
All of us in this House have a choice to make, including both candidates to be the next Tory leader. They can either support the police in their difficult task. I think it's very important, first and foremost, that in all cases, including the particularly difficult case that the speaker mentioned earlier, that the police and prosecutors are able to do their difficult job.
No hemming and hawing about clear ideological motivation then. The speed at which some perpetrators are branded terrorists while others receive careful linguistic gymnastics tells us everything we need to know about the political calculations happening behind the scenes. Rudak Kuban's digital footprint revealed obsessions that paint a disturbing picture. He immersed himself in content about Hitler, Genghis Khan, the Rwandan genocide, and school massacres. In any other context, this cocktail of violent and extremist fascinations would immediately be deemed clear ideological motivation, but apparently not this time. Perhaps the most damning revelation is that Rudak Kuban was actually referred to the Prevent Counter-Terrorism Programme. Let that sink in, the system designed to identify and intervene with potential extremists.
The events today are just truly awful, and I know the whole country is deeply shocked at what they've seen and what they've heard. I do want to thank the emergency services of Merseyside Police who've had to respond to the most difficult of circumstances today. But I do also think about the emergency responders because they have responded to an awful incident today, and I want to thank them for the professionalism that they have shown in doing so.
Had this individual on their radar, but he wasn't taken on because he didn't fit their established ideological profiles. The system had a chance to stop this tragedy before it happened and failed spectacularly. This reclassification scheme allows the government to dodge accountability for Prevent's catastrophic failure. By creating a new category, they can argue that their counter-terrorism programs weren't designed to catch this type of perpetrator, conveniently after the fact. It's like missing a hurricane and then claiming your weather warning system was only designed to detect tornadoes. The political motivations become even more transparent when you consider the timing. Coming on the heels of recent controversies surrounding the government's handling of religious extremism and hate crimes, this redefinition provides a convenient escape hatch. Rather than addressing why their systems failed to prevent this attack despite having the perpetrator on their radar, they can simply move the goalposts. The disturbing reality is that the government is more concerned with controlling the narrative than confronting the truth. By rebranding what happened, they avoid uncomfortable questions about why certain extremist ideologies receive more attention and resources than others, why Prevent failed to intervene despite clear warning signs, and whether political considerations influence how potential threats are classified and handled. The implications of this reclassification stretch far beyond bureaucratic terminology. As experts have emphatically pointed out, consistent classification of terrorism isn't just academic, it's fundamental to effective prevention and public safety. By refusing to call Kuban's actions terrorism, the government undermines the very systems designed to protect us. The emotional toll on victims' families adds another devastating layer. Many have voiced their outrage, feeling that this refusal to use the terrorism label diminishes both their loss and the need for accountability. Their pain is being compounded by what appears to be political expediency. History shows us the dangers of such semantic gymnastics. Previous failures to properly classify violent acts have created dangerous gaps in law enforcement responses. This isn't merely about labels, it's about whether we're willing to sacrifice public safety on the altar of political convenience. When the government rewrites definitions to protect its reputation rather than its citizens, we must ask whose interests are truly being served.